everyone, it is Pooper here for episode 38. Thank you so much for joining me with my Factorio gameplay. I've got huge plans for today's episode because we're finally going to be taking some major steps towards getting our first rocket. So the first thing I want to do in today's episode is start getting our rocket silo researched. That's this one over here. It's very expensive and it's going to be very time consuming because we're still only running on the 1 science pack per second factory, which is the original one we have over here in our bottom circle that we have. I've already tried to upgrade it with some modules and with the assembly 3 machines, but it's still going to take quite some time. So while we have that running in the background, I thought we would go over a couple of the new additions that we have since the previous episode that you may have caught when I zoomed out in the map here. The first one is this huge section over here where we have a ton of new trains, we have a lot of new train pathing, and ultimately it is our new oil refinery and oil and fluid processing area. This is the addition that we added last episode. It's been working great. It's been basically converting crude oil into our refined oil products, the heavy, the light, the petroleum, and then we've even been adding lube over in the chemical plants over here. But since then, I've added in, as you notice, a lot more train stations. And just below our refinery section, we've added in a plastic section. Now this blueprint is very similar to Exterminator's blueprint. I will link it down below, but the main exception is that it's only a 4 cargo wagon train versus the 6 that he uses in his blueprint. So I can also include this blueprint if you would like, just let me know in the comments below. The other thing I've added is a new acid plant. This is also done via train. We have our iron plate and barrels brought in, as well as our petroleum gas brought from the refinery section over here. It is brought in and then robots again will do the barreling and unbarreling, and then it gets brought back onto the train and then delivered over here into our main network. So those are the 2 major things I've done in this section. We've also got another train station over here for some copper farming, but that will just be obsolete eventually when it's all done. So the other main thing you might have noticed on our map that wasn't here before is this monstrosity over here. This is our new nuclear power plant. And the reason for that is because as soon as we were doing our plastic and adding more trains and robots and stuff to the other projects I just showed you, we were running out of power even with the nuclear power plants that we have up here as I originally built. And I owe part of this to thank for Carson McComas. I hope I said your name right. But thank you so much for pointing out in the last episode that there is a nuclear power bonus if the actual nuclear reactors are together. I did read on the Reddit thread that talked about this. I will also link that down below so that for those of you who are also fairly new to nuclear reactors and the nuclear power plants, you guys can read that. But it did help me out a lot to understand that there is a bonus when the reactors are together, and the ratios can vary depending on the bonus. So I ended up building this new nuclear power plant. Only a quarter of it is running at the moment. That's this section over here. I know a lot of the fluid is going to waste, or excuse me, the fuel cells are going to waste because it's still going into all 16 of these nuclear reactors, even though we only need 4 of those powered at this point. But with this section, I believe all 16 of the reactors will make about 1,700 megawatts of power. Right now, if we can click on our power, we only have about 500 megawatts being produced right now because that's all we are needing. We're meeting our satisfaction levels 100%, but as you can see, we still have the potential to about double our power with just our current 4 reactors being used. Once we get the other 3/4 turned on, we'll have about the 1,700 megawatts produced from this factory alone. So there are 16 nuclear reactors in this plant itself, and then there's over 400 of the turbines here. There's about 101 per side. And I consider sides starting from this section over here to this section over here. And so that should be ratio perfect according to the 16 reactor ratios. I did the math on that. It should take about exactly 404 of these turbines. And then it takes about half that for the heat exchangers themselves. And then obviously we have a ton of water that has the potential to be bussed in. But for this side here, because we're near the water, I decided for now we're just going to do it via pump. So we'll eventually turn the rest of this on when we start getting some water trains that can get bussed in here. But we'll walk over here in just a second to show you the rest of how it's set up. I don't have vision over here at the top. So give me just a second and we'll be right over there. Okay, so I made it back over here to the top of our new nuclear power plant. This is where we have our train deliver the fuel cells. We have a ton in storage here, and it also picks up the empty fuel cells. These science packs are here just as space holders for now, just so we don't have any more products put in here that we don't want. But then we have our own logistic robot network in this factory itself, where we have the robots deliver the fuel cells onto this main belt here, which then gets trafficked all the way down here to the supply box over here, where then we have another set of robots that will actually deliver the fuel cells into the requester boxes and then into the nuclear reactors themselves. We have a cool little setup right here where we have a green light when we have more than, I think, 25 fuel cells in the box up here. We also have a speaker, and that will alarm if we have less than 25 in our box. So that way we can always be sure we have enough fuel cells for our reactor, and we never are at risk of really running out of fuel, because by the time we hear the alarm, we can hopefully get a solution for the problem. We also have a couple backup solar arrays over here just in case, so that we can always have the potential to power this, at least to get some fuel cells automatically placed into the reactors. So this whole design in total was actually an inspiration from Fat Man MK3's original design. I will link it over here to the left, as well as a link to the URL in the description below. But his design, I believe, took 32 reactors and could produce up to 5.2 gigawatts. I didn't nearly want something that big or that extensive at this point in the game. So I figure if even once this is all turned on, if we still don't have enough power, I can always just stamp this blueprint again instead of making something bigger. So I do owe a lot of credit to him for the inspiration for this design. I pretty much just cut it in half and then added a couple extra things like a steam storage tank so that we have that for backup. But there's a couple other things I want to do to make this nuclear plant a little bit smarter, and that will be to add a couple smarts to it so that we can not waste as much fuel. So I'm going to work on that a little ways down the line. But I think with that said, we can go ahead and start preparing for our rocket silo. It looks like we're just a little over halfway done now. So I think we're going to have to decide where we want to put our first one. And the other thing we'll have to decide is kind of what we plan for the future. So this base and this whole series was never meant to be a mega base by any means. I just wanted to do something that looked creative. It was still fairly efficient and basically got the job done in a creative and cool looking way and was aesthetically pleasing. But with that said, we're slowly kind of getting into bigger territory. I mean, at this point, we've got really a large oil refinery section. We've got a really great plastic section, and our base could have potential for kind of mega base territory if I were to start replacing some of our other factories, like these red and green factories, with some bot or train supplied factories instead. We would also need to upgrade our science factory if we wanted to go into kind of some mega base territory, but that's an option I'm considering at this point. So with that said, it might be cool to have more than one rocket silo. I've only ever had one rocket silo at a time in any of the maps I've played through, but it might be a really interesting goal for me to work towards more than one rocket, every hour, which is something that I've really struggled with getting rockets launched in the past. So that might be a good personal goal, but again, that's kind of up in the air for now. So I'm thinking, at least in the short term, we will put our first rocket silo in kind of this section over here. And then these couple of extra belts are for having the rocket parts delivered. So the rocket fuel or the satellites or the, I can't remember what they're called, the other parts for it basically can be delivered via these belts. And we're going to be working on those products in a factory we're going to make just in this section over here. So we can have that belted over into the rocket silo, and then maybe for symmetry purposes, if we do add on at least one other factory in the future, or rocket silo in the future, we can add it in this section over here. But for now, I think we're going to finish letting our rocket silo research get done, and then we'll be back once that is. Well, we are back, which means our rocket silo just got done getting researched. So the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is put in the recipe for the rocket silo into this assembly machine here. Let's go ahead and click this one there. And then I've already requested all of the components that should go into the recipe. They're already getting filled from this box here. So once that's done, we're going to go ahead and plop it down. So I'll be right back once that is. Alright, so our first rocket silo is finally getting produced right now in the assembly machine. So it should pop out in just a second here. There we go. So let's now go find a good new home for this. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I'm thinking of having it down here in kind of the bottom right section. So let's go ahead and try and line it up here with this wall so it's fairly even with that. And then if we change our mind later, we can always move it. So I want to leave plenty of space between the robo base, so we'll go ahead and put it right there for now. So that's a good first step towards getting our first rocket. Of course, we don't have the rocket structures built yet, including the low density structures, the rocket fuel, the rocket control units, or the satellite. So we're still a ways off from actually seeing this thing launch anything. But let's go ahead and give it power for now, just so it doesn't blink at me the whole time. There we go. So that will be a good home for it. Again, we may put another one over here if we can even support that much in the future. But for now, let's worry about just supporting this one. So the next step is probably doing the low density structures. I still want to put it in this kind of right hand section over here and kind of a square just below our module setup. So let's see what the low density structures take. It's been a while since I've dealt with this stuff. Okay, so it takes steel, copper, and plastic, all of which are on this right-hand side of our main bus, which is really convenient. So I think all we'll have to do is just take this from our main line and bus it over here into some sort of configuration. I do not have a blueprint or setup in mind yet, so we're just going to kind of have to wing it, and then I can expand on it or modify it as we need to from there. So let's see, how many does it take? Okay, 10 steel and then 5 each of copper and plastic. That's not too bad. The downside though is that it just takes forever to build. So one low density structure takes 30 seconds, so we'll want to use some modules and then of course the assembly 3 machine. And then let's see, how many low density structures does this one take? 10. Okay, that's not too bad. So to get 10, and it's over 3 seconds to produce that, we'll need several of the assembly machines to produce the 10. So let's try and just come up with some sort of configuration, and then we can go ahead and blueprint it and then add more if we need to. So I'm just going to look for an open space for now, just like we have here, and we'll come up with a design we like. We'll do probably 10, so maybe 5 on each side. And then another 5 there. Let's do something like that down the middle. Actually, we'll have it, the product, this will be the output line. And we're again having it feed down into this main bus section over here. So let's go ahead and put in the recipes before I forget what components it takes. If I can find it, there we go. Okay, so we need steel is the number one thing we need. Oh, I do not have steel on this line. Crap. Okay. What I'm gonna have to do is bring it over from this line over here. That won't be a big deal. So I think since we're not using this line here, and I did mean for this to be for sulfur, and instead we have sulfur over here, let's go ahead and we'll kind of divvy this main steel line over here into the right-hand side as well. All right, so now I can go ahead and bring this over again. And for the actual belt weaving part, we'll have to kind of redo this line here with a ton of different belts. We'll exchange between the underground red ones and then the blue ones as well. So I think for starters, let's do this one here. We'll do for steel, and this one here we'll do for the copper and the plastic. Oh, and where are we getting attacked? Ooh. Oh, crap. I better go respond to that real quick before we move along with that much further. They somehow breached our main walls here. Okay, so we have our 2 input lines weaved back and forth through here. That should work just fine. We can go ahead and put our assembly machines back like that, and then we'll just have to alternate between the long-handed inserters and the regular. So let's copy the recipes back over here. We just have to make sure that they get each an input from the red and blue underground belts. So that's those 2, and then this one will be kind of odd. Actually, we could do just like that. There we go. And then our output, like that. And then we basically will, ooh, glad I caught that real quick. Okay, so then we kind of alternate on the other side here. Except we'll want we'll do like this instead. Let's redo this. There we go, and then putting it onto the line like this. So we'll end up having to use the substations to supply this with power. That's not a big deal though. Let's go ahead and make one more, or a couple more. Okay, so that's all of these supplied. So I think I will go ahead and blueprint this and just copy it a couple times, and then we'll go ahead and actually start producing these. So this is what I ended up doing for our low density structure layout. I've configured it so that we now have 24 of the assembly 3 machines in place here. So normally the recipe for the low density structure would take 30 seconds to produce one low density structure. But because we're using the level 3 assembly machines instead, we can essentially cut off 1.25 seconds from the production time, which means it only takes 24 assemblers to produce one low density structure per second. So essentially that's what this should theoretically produce. I haven't turned it on yet to for sure confirm that ratio, but we're going to go ahead and do that now. All we have to do now is hook up our steel, which is coming from the top and the bottom. I ended up cutting it kind of in half here in terms of our input products because we weren't having it come all the way down. So we'll turn it on here and then again at the top, right there. And then let's just make sure it kind of starts working properly. It should go even faster once we get some modules in place yet, but I'm running a little bit low. I think I'm going to end up doing production 3 modules in here, but for now I don't quite have that. So let's go ahead and take a look at our production graph here. So in 1 minute, we want to look at our low density structures, which are here. Okay, so far we're up to 30, and it's rising. 35, 39, 40. Can we make it up to 60? Okay, still hovering around 46 per minute. Okay, now up to 50, 55, and 60. So we're now producing 60 plus of the low density structures per minute, which is 1 low density structure or so per second. We're even producing a little bit more than that per second. So this is great. It's working exactly as I hoped. It will work even faster once we get some modules in place. So let's go ahead and move on to our next project. So the next item on our agenda is coming up with a layout for the rocket control unit production. Now these require processing units and speed 1 modules, which is why way back when we did our module layout, I did duplicates of the speed modules. And that way we can allocate the speed 1 modules from one of them to go straight into our rocket control unit production. So I'm going to figure out how to get our speed 1s all configured onto one belt here, and then we'll lower it down into the section adjacent to our low density structures and then go from there. So not only did I figure out a way to bring down the speed 1 modules, but I ended up just completing the factory entirely off camera simply because, as you will notice, it is the exact same footprint as our low density structure layout that we created earlier. The big differences, of course, are the fact that we have a different recipe in the machines, as well as a slightly different belt configuration. And the reason for that is that we only have 2 ingredients that go into making this recipe, so no belt weaving was required. The other similarity is the fact that we have the same production rate of the rocket control units just like we have of the low density structures. So theoretically, between using the 24 assembly 3 machines, this should produce 1 rocket control unit per second. We are not doing that, of course, and the reason for that, if you look, is we're having a very big throughput issue. We're doing okay on our speed 1 modules, but our blue circuits are really lagging behind in their production. So assuming we had 100% throughput of both of the ingredients going into this recipe, we would again have 60 per minute or 1 rocket control unit per second. In terms of our low density structures, our main bus is entirely backed up, so much so that our factory isn't even on at this point. Even our rocket control units are slowly building up onto our main bus line, although it's not at a very sustainable rate, so that's a throughput issue I'm hoping I can solve off camera. So before we can launch the rocket, the only thing we're really missing at this point is the satellite, which won't be a big deal at all, and then the rocket fuel, which I think we'll put off until next episode. So for now, I think we're going to call it quits, but as always, I appreciate you all for joining me, and I hope you'll stick around for the next one.